Hey everyone. So I was avoiding doing this video, but I feel like it needs to be talked about because it bothers me. You're welcome, Nick. We were just doing a little question and answer before this, but I wanted to get out of this because this is kind of the main event. It's something that's been bothering me and I wanted to go over it. So right here is a video called What is a Woman? Debating DemonMama and My Entire Community by Riley Grace Roshong. And I want to start off with a caveat. I don't dislike Riley. I think Riley's fucking brilliant. I also think Riley's the type of person we want arguing for us in the Senate or in other legal forums to advocate for our rights. Because Riley is a law student, and I think a very bright one, an incredibly great person. I think this is the type of people we want to fight for our rights. So I want to say this because, Riley, if you watch this, you probably won't, but if you do watch this, I really like you. I think you're really great. So all of my critiques are based around wanting to see things be better, not as an attempt to tear down. In my previous video, I mentioned the one with the really shitty audio, because I, for some reason, was dual audioing for some reason. What happened is that I wanted to be very clear. I thought that your allowance of Calvin Gara to be in a position where he could be redeemed for things that did not happen to binary trans people and ignored the voices and stories of non-binary people was inappropriate. I felt like you were good faith. I thought you were really trying and wanting to be a good person. And I feel like you went too far and didn't actually know the harm this boy has done demonstrably. Again, I don't dislike you. I think your work is really good. But I want to cover this stuff because I think it's important from a mental health perspective. So with that said, with that sort of caveat there, let's get started. Riley Grace Roshong is, as I said, a law student. She does not give out legal advice. She does, however, have a very great knack for creating very rigid and very, airtight arguments. She genuinely seems to stream on Twitch, tends to play games like Elder Scrolls Online, and has debates and discussions with various other people. She's debated Calvin Gara and Buck Angel, she's debated Destiny, she's debated a whole bunch of people. And she's known for being very sort of friends with everyone, right? She's a part of Destiny's community, she's a part of Vosh's community, she's friends with Natalie. She's sort of tangentially interacting with a lot of different people. On the other side of this, we have DemonMama, and I will see if I can grab DemonMama's stuff. 1 second. DemonMama. So, this is DemonMama. DemonMama is primarily a Twitch streamer. She does good work. I think she's interesting. I haven't seen a lot of her, but the stuff I have seen I've been okay with. This is a lot of the Twitch streaming stuff that then gets put into bite-sized videos. Why am I bringing these two people up? These are two trans women that I feel like are really intelligent, and I feel like they're really great, and they had a falling out. They were on a stream together, it looks like back on the 17th, and having a discussion about originally some silliness about furry rights, and then it sort of modified or changed into defining transness and or gender as a concept, and then also using the example of what is a woman. And I feel like there's two sides to this. I'm not saying their sides. I'm not so much interested in that. There's the concept of gender question and sort of my understanding of their positions, and the way the conversation appears from a mental health perspective. Because I think there's stuff that we can learn from this for ourselves, for each other, for future discussions. Because I feel like this is a big deal. And so I want to cover the content of the discussion and then the framework of the discussion. Does that make sense? So what we're going to do first is discuss this idea of their two arguments and where I think they're missing each other. because I think understanding gender in this format is really good. So my understanding is that Riley has created a narrative, or an argument, better yet, where she is trying to differentiate the idea of subjective gender versus objective gender. In this case, objective gender being something akin to gender expression, and subjective gender being sort of the felt experience of gender. And what she is essentially asserting, if I understand it, and if you want to read her actual argument, you can find it on her research doc, the actual thing that's up on screen right now. You can actually look at that research doc online. You can go to at RGR doc or docs on Twitter and look at her actual argument. It has links. All of these little blue things right here are the fucking sources. Like, she's really, really good at this stuff. But essentially what I understand is that she's trying to differentiate subjective versus objective, because what her concern is that arguments such as just self-identity leave us open to a lot of problematic takes, specifically from TERFs and transphobes, because if we don't have a concrete definition of what is gender and thus what is transness, there is a way in which we can just still be sort of strawmanned or sort of gaslit into being told that this is just a preference, this is just a fetish, anyone could do this, right? That's where the whole bathroom thing, what if a guy just pretends to be a trans woman? Like, no one pretends to be a trans woman. But this idea is that how do you create an airtight argument so that they can't do this? And from a certain perspective, that endeavor is really solid, because if you can show what objectively is gender, what objectively, right, as far as the research shows, what it means to be trans, and sort of point out that these things matter, that this isn't just a matter of choice, this is a matter of some internal processes sort of bringing about this awareness. And I'm not saying dysphoria. She's very clear to be clear, be understanding of that. It's not dysphoria. It's something else. It's just that knowledge, that sudden awareness that you are a girl, or you are a boy, or you are neither. I like this aspect of Riley's argument because I feel like what it does is, in legal or research-based ideas, it gives a very clear idea of what a woman is, for example. And that's where a lot of their argument was, is what do you define, how do you view a woman? And DemonMama's argument was essentially that anyone who identifies as a woman is a woman. And that's fine from a social constructive or performative theory idea. But the problem is that's not particularly strong. It's not a particularly, like, powerful argument, because what essentially it does is that it can be easily torn apart by somebody just saying that's not true. Or we get into some really weird hypotheticals of what if the person's lying, right? So we have to assume that there's some inborn, some part of us that knows, and then we act from that. And I would agree with that assertion, because whatever that is shows that we are trans. That is what's going on. That experience of whatever that push is. It doesn't have to be dysphoria. It could be euphoria. Could be any number of things. But it's that thing that pushes us to be who we are. To be ourselves, really. And I think pointing that out and looking at that is really solid. By creating a definition of transness, or the idea of gender, it makes it so this is a concrete thing and much harder to deal with. So that's the side of Riley. And I'm trying not to strawman anyone here. I'm going based on what I could remember from watching videos during some really hard times. I was watching most of this through the last couple days. Xena went to the hospital last night, and so I stayed up and watched a bunch of these, and they were really great. But again, my head's a little fluffy, so we'll see how that goes. My understanding of DemonMama's argument is that gender is, by its nature, sort of this nebulous and very fuzzy idea that is really hard to put a finger on, and seems to be really comes down to is choice. And DemonMama's concern, as far as I understand it, is the idea that gender needs to remain sort of an open concept, because if it isn't kept to a certain level of vagary, then this can lead to things like in-group, out-group, or gatekeeping, or other things like that. My understanding of what they're both saying, I think there is truth to both of them. But I think both ideas are flawed. And here's why. Later, if you watch another stream, and don't worry, for this video, I will make sure all the links that I have watched are below. If there's other links you wish to watch, you're welcome to, but I haven't been able to get to them, so you will see the four videos I watched. Those are What is a Woman? Debating DemonMama from Riley, a video where Riley Grace Roshong talks to Destiny, a well-known streamer who's very controversial. I have my own personal thoughts on Destiny, but I did like some of the things he said in this discussion. And what was the third one? I forget the third one. I know the fourth one was the DemonMama video Exposé talking about her side of it. And there's probably people asking, like, well, you're a mental health therapist. Why the fuck are you talking about drama? I'm not really interested in the drama. I'm interested in what happened and how that can affect a community and what we can learn from it and also discuss it. So the reason I want to talk about gender as a concept is that I feel like if we don't nail this down, or at least to some degree have a clear idea about it, I feel like this type of stuff can happen to other communities. And I'm concerned about the effects. So what I'll say is this. I think Riley's goal seems to be to create an airtight argument to support the existence of trans people. Her attempt is in no way set up in a way to be transmedicalist. I'm not trying to frame her as such. In no way is it trying to, push out or not support non-binary people. She's been very clear that she supports non-binary people. Her doc even very clearly says that they are who they say they are. Her goal is to make a clear understanding based on the literature of what it means to be a gender and what it means to thus be transgender. The reason why I think DemonMama and a lot of people reacted poorly to this when this was used on a trans woman is that in previous arguments, Riley using this stuff against transphobes and TERFs and, tautology, but they're the same fucking thing. But, the reason why I think there's a lot of concern around this is that I think that the trans community, myself included, has a trigger. And I'm not using the SJW thing. Please, I'm not going to go over this 100 times, but I'll say this very clearly. When I say trigger, I mean a mental health trigger. There is a way that this thing can be triggering. And I want to be very clear that the term trigger I'm using, I learned from Gestalt therapy. This is not just triggers in regards to trauma. This is triggers in regards to emotional outbursts based on incredibly powerful and very, very intense emotions in the moment. I think there is a gut reaction by many trans people that when they see somebody trying to define transness, define gender, they get reactive. And good, and to some degree, rightly so. If we look at earlier variations of transness, if we look at other earlier discussions of gender and sexuality, they're always rudimentary, they're always really shitty, and they always end up fucking us up, right? If we let cis people define what being transgender means, we end up in a really gross series of problems. So I think there's a way that a lot of people, including the people in Riley's community, reacted very poorly to this because I think there's a knee-jerk reaction to not liking the idea of defining transness to a concrete level, because to do so can either, one, be harmful in the sense that it establishes a line in which that person may not feel like they actually meet it, because this is what transmedicalists have done. They've set up the line where if you haven't fully finished transitioning, you haven't gotten SRS, you're not real, you're not valid. Or it can even go so far as to act as gatekeeping for people like non-binary folks, right? And so I think that these people reacted really poorly to this. And I think what happened is that there is a difference between discussing a fuzzy concept and trying to nail it down, and trying to establish a line when you are triggered, and I will get to that more in a little bit. I think Riley's doc is really solid, and I encourage anyone that wants to understand trans stuff and wants to see somebody who's very good at creating argumentation, check it out. But I have a feeling that this debate caused such huge ripples in their communities, which I am not a part of either. I only know DemonMama from a few videos. I'm in Riley's Discord. I don't really do much there. I really just wanted the emotes. I don't watch a ton of her videos, mostly because I don't feel super connected to them. But there is a way in which I feel like this desire to create a hardline argument is good and important. I also feel like there's a lot of sensitivity around it, and I feel like at the beginning of this debate, the one currently on screen, for the first 50% of it, Riley did an incredibly shitty job describing her points and arguing them. Her terms of subjective and objective I do not think are useful, and even Destiny in a later video called her out on this, saying that these terms don't really work and don't actually explain what you're doing. To me, subject and object are subject, witness, the person observing, and objective, the thing that is empirically being experienced. Gender is a construct, and while it can be sort of mapped, it can't really be necessarily looked at as an objective object. It's not the same thing as, say, like, this makeup sponge, right? So, like, this is my point. I feel like there's a worthiness to this, but the language needs to improve. And so I implore anybody who wants to understand this better, please check out her document. I'll try to put the link directly for that document in the video, because I want to make sure I'm not strawmanning anything. I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. If I'm not, please correct me. But my understanding is Riley has a very strong want to have a clear definition to make it essentially ironclad that transphobes can't fuck with us. My understanding of DemonMama's argument is that gender is a nebulous concept that's harder to map and to some degree meaningless. DemonMama identifies as a gender abolitionist, which means that eventually what she would like to do is see gender completely eradicated. Now, I don't know if I'm a gender abolitionist. I go both ways, but I do feel like gender has a lot of problems as far as rigidity. I think we need to fix those, but I don't know if I want to get rid of all the things that signify gender. Anyway. Not really about me. More about what her argument is that essentially she didn't want to, it seemed like, allow for there to be a hard definition, because the concern was a hard definition by her standards would essentially cut certain people out, that it would start to sound transmedicalist. I don't think that's what Riley was going for, and I don't think that was going on. My take is this. I think that Riley made a mistake in arguing for her document in a very poor way that didn't in any meaningful way communicate what exactly she meant. I think the uses of subjective and objective were not useful, and there are better languages such as the experience of being trans, or the experience of gender versus gender expression. There's better ways to describe those terms, and even still, depending on the video I watch of hers, I'm still confused by their use. I'll say that with DemonMama's, I dislike the idea of keeping gender so loose as to never be able to nail it down. To do so creates problems. Not because it lets anyone in that wants to be trans. I don't really care about that. No one's going to identify as one of us unless they are one of us. Now, there are people who could be problematic and do so. Jessica and Eve would be an example of that. But again, that's not their transness. That's that person's sick, right? Like, the idea that someone would pretend to be trans, like, I don't know if that's actually ever been a thing. Like, if you can find me examples, please do so, but I can't find shit. My take is this. I am very hesitant to say either one of these perspectives is the right one, because I feel like both of them have massive flaws. This is what I wrote when I was taking notes. I agree that just identities, that is, I am a woman because I'm a woman, is problematic, but the reverses various levels of gatekeeping. Riley's focus on logic does not really help because the people who hate us are not logical or reasonable. Transness is a choice due to transness is a choice due to being a social and political group. The reason I wrote that is this. There was a point in that argument where there was a discussion of, well, does one choose to be trans? And I would say, kinda. No, you do not choose to be trans when you have dysphoria or euphoria or a sudden sort of awareness that you are a gender that you were not assigned. I feel like that's an inborn thing that we cannot sort of clarify as just being a choice. That is something that sort of just happens. Now, you can make arguments from consciousness, you can make arguments from psychology, you can make a number of arguments, you can look at fucking all the crazy shit Blanchard did and all the discussions around genetics. I don't give a fuck about any of that. What I care about is that the how and why gender comes about seems to be a hodgepodge of social programming, genetics, hormones and endocrine system interactions in the womb, all sorts of fucking messaging, and some inborn knowing. And this is why I've never really doubled down on the social constructive theory. To some degree, I dis-fucking like it, because social constructive theory does not account for children. Here's what I mean. I would argue that this question that Nick asked earlier about sort of mental development actually is important here. And that's because this, by definition, when you are 3 or 4 and you know you're a girl, doesn't matter if you were born with XY chromosomes, doesn't matter if you were born with a penis, but you know you're a girl. Why does a kid know that? Why? Like, legitimately, why? If you're saying it's a social constructive thing, if it's literally programming, right, then I can make the argument that, okay, so a 20-something, a 15-year-old, by then they've been around on the planet long enough that they probably have picked up that sort of messaging, right? But a 3-year-old? They probably have a little bit, but again, 3, 5-year-old, they're just now starting to get to egocentric. They don't even really understand other people. Do you think they understand a concept as difficult as gender or the ideas of that? They might have a nascent understanding of those things, but there's something going on in that system where a 3-year-old little girl who was born an assigned male knows that she's a girl, and that inborn knowing, the inborn knowing that I have that I'm a woman, the inborn knowing that I know that the trans women in the chat are women, or the non-binary people there are non-binary, or the trans men here that are men. That inborn knowing is not a choice. There's some way in which we are sort of have this thrust upon us, like everything else in nature. I tend to be an existentialist, and one of the things I bring up about this in therapy is no one chooses to be here. You don't choose whose vagina you fall out of. You don't choose your color, you don't choose your ethnicity, you don't choose your gender, you don't choose the time period, you don't choose any of this shit. And so the idea that like being trans is a choice from the experiential side is complete bollocks. And there's a way that it is a choice, but not in regards of that. Now, I would argue that choice always requires awareness. So we can look at people in the past and say they didn't really know that being trans was possible. So there's probably many people, scores of people, infinite numbers of people in the past who may have been trans but didn't know it, or weren't able to articulate it, or didn't have anything in their society that allowed for that. But if you have the awareness that being trans, right, living as a woman, living as a man, living as non-binary, if you know that exists, then by definition, you now have a choice. You can choose to either stay in the closet and never worry about this shit again, or you can choose to come out. And by coming out, you're not just choosing that I am the gender I believe I am, that I experience myself as, right? But you are also choosing to be part of a social group and a political group, right? You're now all sort of on the same thing. Like, let's be really clear. Anyone in the trans community hears another trans girl or trans boy or whoever says they're a conservative, we all look at them side-eyed. because they're breaking in-group rules. We don't assume that's okay. Why the fuck are you voting against the rest of us? And that's because there's a choice. You're joining essentially a group by doing so. And so this is where I think one of the fundamental misunderstandings is. DemonMama doesn't want to give up the ghost on the fact that there is some aspect, some inborn knowing that is not chosen. Because if we nail that down, that's probably going to create some problems, or, at least from her perspective, be problematic. I'm not sure which. She wasn't super clear as to what that meant, or what her concerns were. Riley is correct that there is some aspect of being trans that is not chosen, except there are some things about being trans that are, and I think that that needs to be accounted for. And I also think that to some degree, Riley's point about the fact that the concept of a woman, even though every single human being has a different idea of what a woman is, there is a way in which we still have sort of an understanding. And I like what Destiny said about this. And again, I'm not a Destiny stan. I have my fucking problems with the man. But, like, he mentioned this in one of the videos that Riley posted that was very clearly this. The way that you argue this better is to argue car. You talk about a car, even though everyone has a different idea of what cars are, like what cars that come to mind first when you say that. If I ask everybody to draw a car, they may all draw different things, like a truck, a van, or whatnot. They might draw something from the past, something from the future, but they're all going to fall into this very basic, vague idea of a car. And that's kind of how woman is. It's a category that has a vague understanding that everybody can sort of point to, but everyone has a slightly different view on it. This is what we mean by a social construct. It's something we're all sort of constructing together as an idea. Riley's idea that trying to nail down this idea that this is not chosen, this is who people are, is great. I think that's a great idea. I mentioned here there's a difference between descriptive and prescriptive. What I mean by that is there's a difference when we make a statement between a descriptive statement, that is something that describes something, or a prescriptive statement, which just means you're sort of pushing for this idea of what should be, what must be, right? My way of engaging with this would be is that Riley's argument works very well as a descriptive claim, but I think a lot of people are afraid that it is a prescriptive claim. That is, they think that's what Riley is trying to say, namely that she wants things to be this way rather than this is the way things are. And I think this is where a lot of the triggering comes up. And I also think it's where the massive discrepancy in this conversation come up. I think it's very important to watch these videos and understand that there's some very real ways that, like, you have to be very careful and very clear with your language. The other thing to realize here is that if you watch this, and I think you should, Riley's major thought process is that having a very rigid, very tight, airtight, watertight argument for trans people is super good, and I agree. And I think that's true whenever we're writing laws or whenever there is, like, say, guidelines at an institute or some other thing happening. However, there is a way in which people who are not amenable to trans people are not going to fucking care. Right? They're not going to give a shit. This is because transphobia is by its nature not rational. In fact, back when I was in college, there was a class we took called The Psychology of Prejudice, and one of the things it talked about was that people have different political views based on their disgust response. Essentially, what it asserted is that people who were very sensitive to disgust, that is the emotion of disgust, the physical act of revulsion, were more likely to be conservative. People who had a much more desensitized form of disgust were much more likely to be liberal. And the reason for this is clear. People who are conservative tend to have a much higher reaction to things they don't understand or see. This comes back to the idea of why I think conservatism is a pathology. In some ways, what I think needs to be really understood is that you can come up with any type of airtight argument that will work in certain facets of existence, but at the end of the day, transphobes will never believe us. Not once. You may be able to convince some, but again, transphobia comes from this disgust response. It comes from a visceral lizard brain reaction. Is everyone understanding this so far? I saw we had a person drop off, but I want to make sure this is clear. I want it to be very clearly understood that I think both of these women have good ideas. I think both of them are incredibly intelligent. I also think that their arguments have holes. So that's the argument portion. I would say that I agree with Riley that insofar as dealing with certain situations, I think having a concrete idea of what gender is, what a woman is, are useful because in many ways there are laws, there are protections, there are things in society and reality that need to be understood from this perspective. Just because something's a social construct doesn't mean it's not real, right? We all sort of understand the vague notion of what a woman is. That's a real thing. You can't even be a gender abolitionist if you don't want to abolish something. You're trying to abolish the prison that is gender, at least from that perspective. I don't know if I fully agree with that, but I do see that there are very real restrictions and limitations for both sort of culturally prescribed genders that are problematic. So that's my understanding of their two perspectives. I see DemonMama as a person who was trying to defend the notion of gender as more of a vague concept because trying to double down on what that is or double down on the idea of what a woman is could lead to some form of gatekeeping, some form of problem in the future. Riley is attempting to create an airtight argument so that in certain facets of reality, this could be useful, but I think in some ways ignores the fact that a reasoned argument doesn't always work because you're not always dealing with the reasoned part of a person. Cool. Cool, thank you, thank you, Funky Thought. I want to make sure people are following. So with that said, that's the first half. That's the first thing I want to talk about. I don't think Riley Grace Roshong is a transmed. I don't in any way, shape, or form. I don't think that DemonMama is in any way harmful. And I know that's been one of the things thrown out, and I'll explain why in a moment. I don't think either of these are necessarily bad people. I think both girls are pretty fucking cool. I think they do really good stuff. I've seen DemonMama on the Hippie Dippy podcast arguing like a champion. She reminds me a lot of Vosh, and I know there's some overlap there. They know one another. I like good arguments. I like good rhetoric, so I think that's neat. And I think Riley, while not always my cup of tea, is a really good person trying to do good things. And now we get to the second half, the mental health half. I want you guys to watch this, not just for the idea of what gender is. I think it's very easy for us as trans people to, for those of us in the audience who are trans, those of us as trans people to go through and sort of get onto the discussion of things like gender, what it means to be a woman, all that kind of stuff, because that stuff's directly relevant to us, right? What I would argue is that there is another layer here that is incredibly painful, and no one is talking about it. So, let me see if I can find it. So, I'm not going to play this video. I want Riley to get her views. I think that's fair. I don't want to play leftist people's stuff on here unless I really have an issue with what they're doing. The context of this situation is that both of these women have been streaming for hours. Riley, if I remember correctly, the number given was 7. DemonMama, even more. I think 9 was the number. Both of them were tired. Both of them were really I think, pretty fucked. And that's where this started. Go through and watch the video, and there's a point very clearly in the beginning where Riley asserts that there is such a thing as objective gender. And I can understand why DemonMama pushes back, because DemonMama pushed back because I would argue that gender is an intersubjective phenomenon. It is not an objective phenomenon. If you want to use the term subjective, objective, sure, it is an object in awareness. There's an idea of gender. But really what it is more of an intersubjective thing. It is a we space. We experience gender, both in ourselves and also with one another. When this conversation happened, and DemonMama disagreed, in a very, I would argue, sort of flippant way, Riley got triggered. And I want to be very clear, I'm not saying SJW triggered, I'm not saying triggered as in, like, there's trauma, I'm not saying this has, like, Riley has some attachment to her doc, although I assume she does, because the fucking thing is put together well. The reason why I want to point this out is that I think there's a point where Riley got really upset quickly because she was afraid that DemonMama was running around with really shitty concepts of gender and was going to do harm. Riley's goal from the get-go, to my understanding, is to create an argument for the purposes of defending us. That's why her fucking... I don't know if this is why, but this is my guess, is that that's why one of the reasons her channel's symbol is a fucking, like, trans-colored shield. She's trying to be defensive, protective of us. And this is why she gets along with so many people, including problematic creators, because she supports people who overall do net good. Vosh is problematic. Vosh says spicy things. He has gone off on rants about trans people in the past. He also has argued for us in incredibly positive ways. He has done some really great frickin' things as far as dealing with trans people and gender. And I still see him as an overall net good. I think Riley is very concerned about how we do arguments. And when we say that gender is just a choice, which is what DemonMama kind of doubled down on, Riley got very upset because having a trans creator running around using a bad argument, specifically a bad argument about gender, which affects all of us, is really scary. And I'm not saying triggered like Riley got aggressive or violent. I think when people get that triggered, it's fear. We've talked about this before, but it's fear, right? As the conversation goes on, Riley gets particularly more and more upset. DemonMama starts in her tone, well, yes, her arguments make sense, her tone feels weird. I'm not sure whether she's trying to be antagonistic or whether she's just on the defensive. At one point, she says she wants to leave the call. Riley pushes back and says she needs to stay. She really wants her to argue this. And Riley is being very pushy at this point. Now, I agree with Riley's take on this, is that DemonMama could have left the call at any point. She could have left. This idea that she was sort of held against her will or whatnot, which is you'll see in some of the discussion, is, in my opinion, nonsensical. You can't be held on a Discord call. What I think happened is that Riley started arguing because she was arguing from a place of emotional reaction. And this is why her argument came out so shit. And so the first half of this is Riley attempting to make arguments that don't make sense to her, or not necessarily to her, but to DemonMama and also her community. There's a reason the video is called "And My Entire Community." During this conversation, my experience of both women is that this started at least semi-good faith. Riley's trigger seemed to bring something up in DemonMama, and this is my projection, feel free to disagree, where this became an optics issue. This became a way in which to push back and attempt at some level to get into an argument in the same way you would argue with someone who's in bad faith. Except I don't think Riley was ever in bad faith. I don't think she was ever arguing from a place of trying to hurt. She was trying to defend a point. And not always well. From there on, there was a point where DemonMama mutes Riley. They come to a place where they're able to at least have some level of common discussion. Riley is doing her damnedest by this point to stay as calm and neutral as possible. And she spends a great amount of time making an argument, showing the lines, and when she gets to the end of it, DemonMama, in what I can only describe as a troll effort, does not follow her on that pier. She follows every single point leading up to the same conclusion, but does not accept the conclusion, and basically either one sort of, I would say, almost feels like it's a form of like emotional push, where it's like, I've walked with you all the way to the edge of the water, but I refuse to go out on that pier. It just feels resistant for the sake of resistant, or it just feels petty. And I don't want to say that about DemonMama because I don't know her. I don't know anything about her. I only know that in the discussion of this, my observation is that I don't know where she's coming from, because her tone and her arguing begin to break down as time goes on, and her tone seems more and more sort of like not really engaged. It has this thing of like faux calmness. Destiny framed it as like this idea of like faux calmness in the sense of trying to use being calm as a way to be able to essentially gaslight the other person. I don't know if that's provable at this point. I would say watch it yourself, come to your own conclusions. I think DemonMama's tone and behavior was getting not problematic, but at least to some degree. I don't know if either of them by this point were really arguing in good faith. There really wasn't an attempt to hear each other charitably. There wasn't really an attempt to hear anything effective. And then there was the fallout. So the story doesn't end well. Riley, at one point, because DemonMama basically just kind of ignored the entire argument and just said, no, I'm not going to take that. Riley got upset, said fuck you, lost her shit, hung up the phone, hung up the Discord. It wasn't a great look. Following this, Riley got really upset. Her chat pushed back on her a lot. If you watch her Discord chat right here, it ain't great. People are losing their shit. A lot of them are really upset at her. Riley, still very triggered from the argument, either asked for people to come in and argue with her, enter the waiting room, or if people are going to say dumb shit, ban them. It's not a good look. The last third to a fourth of the video is a lot of her being really triggered and upset, and people in her community trying to reason with her, because at this point she's really triggered and upset. And again, I'm not using triggered to defame her or pull down. She has every right to be upset. I don't think her actions are great, but I get the understanding of the emotions. Following this, Riley met with Destiny, as I said, and Destiny is Destiny. He's problematic. There's some things he says that weren't great. He uses the T-slur and a couple other slurs just sort of offhandedly, making a point, of course, that there are people just out in the regular world that do this, while the internet is very different from the rest of the meat space world. It's still not great. Riley doesn't really call him on it, and it sort of turns into this video where Destiny is kind of calling in every so often, saying he's watched another chunk of the video and pointing things out. And I will argue that I don't know if I agree with his take as far as supposedly DemonMama is doing something bad, wrong, evil, whatever, because I think he has a very real bias there. But what I would say is, at least from my perspective, is that I think he does a good job pointing out some of the tactics she's using and some of the ways it doesn't feel like she's really engaging with the content, which is continually infuriating Riley. He also does point out that she does use some emotional pushes, specifically trying to compare Riley to Destiny, or trying to compare Riley, sort of point out to Riley that, like, this has a lot to do with you being trans, that's why it's so important to you, something to that effect. I don't remember the exact statement. Following this, there's a conversation between Lumiru and Riley. I didn't get a chance. Lumiru's a Twitch streamer who's non-binary. They are super adorable. I have not watched that one. That was why I couldn't remember it. I did not watch that one yet. Then DemonMama's Exposé video came out. About 6 days ago or so, give or take. DemonMama put out a video that essentially tried to talk about all this, and the video is clearly framed to make Riley look bad. However, there are things there with receipts that are not great. Namely, for having Destiny on there and allowing him to say slurs, on top of the way Riley was handling the community, The thing I had found out during these discussions is that Riley and DemonMama's community had a lot of overlap. There was a lot of people that were in both. And suddenly a lot of people were upset and feeling like they had to leave one or the other. The reason why I wanted to talk about this on stream and why it's fucking important to me is this. Riley's trigger, and subsequently DemonMama becoming more and more dissonant and creating dissent and pushing back in a certain way, was not great. It created a toxic situation. I'm not saying both these women are toxic. I'm saying it created a toxic situation that ended in nothing good. Because what it turned into was a giant community fight in which Riley banned numerous people. According to DemonMama, I don't know if this is true, because again, I'm not active in these communities, but apparently Riley had numerous people step down, including close friends, and her editor, who were trying to call her out and point out that you're behaving inappropriately, you're having Destiny on, why are you doing all these erratic things? And it keeps going from there. The two communities keep splitting, more people are upset. DemonMama says, according to her, barely anything except for like one post or something, but she basically stays quiet. One of the context pieces here is that when this fight happened, there was sort of an agreement between both communities that this VOD should, like this video should have never been posted. And then Riley did it anyway. Riley posted the video because she wanted evidence to show that, like, no, the DemonMama is putting out bad arguments and all that. To me, it feels petty. It feels kind of shitty. And at least as far as I can tell, DemonMama is telling the truth about this. She didn't attempt in any way to put the video up until after Riley did, and until after it was asked by several people, including many people in Riley's community, to do this. Now, I'm going by the things I've seen from Riley's videos, the Riley talking to members of her community, and also the stuff that DemonMama brought up, including the receipts that DemonMama shows. Okay, so that's what's happened. Now what? The reason why I wanted to bring this up to you is for two reasons. One is I think the discussion about gender and how we frame and interact with gender, I think is important for anyone to watch, despite the fact that Riley is clearly emotionally upset and clearly bothered, and that DemonMama is not helping the situation. There is a very real fact of the matter that I think this conversation is something we as trans people need to have. How do we describe ourselves, and in what language, and how do we make those arguments airtight while still opening and being free for every one of us? My concern is that Riley's argument could be modified to certain ways to lead to the outcome of transmedicalism or other things. I'm not saying Riley's a transmedicalist. She's not. That is my belief. She is not. But my fear is that this similar way in which someone could twist information could lead to some of those outcomes. And it does feel somewhat that it is an in-group creation. It is a way in which by describing this thing, you are saying someone is or is not. Even though that may be trying to encompass everybody, that still could be very scary for a lot of trans people. I feel like DemonMama wasn't really willing to actually follow her down that pier, and I honestly feel like DemonMama, towards especially the middle part of this, really just was being a troll. Like, I don't think her arguments were bad, I just think she was being a troll. And so I want to point this out as a way to sort of look at how gender is discussed, how we understand it, and then I also want to talk about it from the mental health perspective. What could have been done to stop this? I'll tell you what my take is. The moment Riley got triggered, this conversation should have stopped. You can see it. Watch the video. I don't know the exact timestamp, but watch the video. You can tell there's a point where Riley gets way more animated, way more upset, because the idea that another content creator would behave this way is really scary to her. I get it. It's scary to me too. I don't want people with bad arguments. I'm terrified my arguments are going to suck. And rather than DemonMama doing the right thing and saying this conversation needs to end, I'm hanging up now, DemonMama kept entertaining it and kept using tactics that I feel like exacerbated the issue, and Riley did as well. And this continued until both women were so upset that it ended in a screaming match and ended with a phone hang-up. and then systematically caused Riley to act out against various members of her community and subsequently a lot of issues. And one of the ideas that was communicated from this is that this is not just in their communities. Because Riley went to Destiny, and because Destiny doesn't like DemonMama, because of course there's always streamer drama, by definition, there's been an argument, and at least DemonMama's made this assertion, that DGGers, i.e. Destiny's website chat, people go out and start shit, or can act transphobically. And I don't have any verification on that. I didn't see any specific receipts on that. But I need to bring this up because this shit can't happen. It just can't. It's a fucking nightmare. These women both have good ideas and are good at argumentation, and this was them at their worst. This was them acting in a way that was incredibly problematic and not shutting it down. And instead of just leaving, it kept going, and it kept going, and it kept going. Riley should have never pushed for it to keep going. I know she wanted to make this point, but this really doesn't matter. Even if DemonMama has a bad idea of what gender means or what a woman is or any of that nonsense, it is not worth the friendship. And honestly, you two were not in the best place to do this. This was a shit idea from the get. And this is important for us as a community because, well, yes, there's not a lot of us. This is a thing to watch for. People are going to get triggered. People are going to get upset. People are going to lash out. What we do is create better ways to lash out that don't harm anybody, or at least better ways to express ourselves. And we, by definition, don't stay engaged in an argument when we're not emotionally sound. And I'm not saying this is like a gaslighty way on Riley. I'm saying it to both women. I think that I've seen both their communities try to push the other one as doing either this, that, or being terrible or this. No, they were both upset, they were both tired, and they acted out. And this is not the good time to deal with this stuff. My hope is that this stuff affects their content. And I hope what it does is it allows for both of them to know in the future better how to deal with these kinds of conversations. Because if you want to maintain a relationship with another content creator, you have to know when not to engage. You have to know when it's time to step away, and neither of them did. This conversation takes 3 hours, and according to DemonMama, who posted her version, some of it was cut. I don't know if that's true. I haven't watched DemonMama's part yet. I'm going to check it out. But I want you guys to think about this. I really, really do. We can't have this anymore. Now, I know this segment is long, and I need you guys to hang in there for just a little bit longer. So, there is a server that we run. I'm not going to name it because it's a private one. But there was a discussion that happened on there with one of my friends. And the friend had posted something that was essentially an argument that, if I'm understanding correctly, was a sort of discussion argument. It was them sort of paraphrasing their brother, who is a cishet man. My understanding is that there was an attempt to clarify this argument, and I want to read what my friend wrote, what my friend's brother wrote, because this is his response to the video. Hi, this is such and such's bro, and she wanted me to help clarify what we were talking about. Reading the post above, I could see how it sounds like Tova was channeling a cisgendered, can't we all get along, which is definitely not what we were talking about. The primary thing we've been talking over is a category like women becomes a term that we feel we need to police or impose on each other, or is it a definition in the experience of a woman has to be the same as someone else's experience and feelings of womanhood. Based on what they said about the vid here, it seems like this is what this video is about, whether or not one can or should generalize a notion of a woman. But I always wonder about the prior assumptions here that guide such arguments. Who are you, or anyone, to say, let alone police, what is a woman? We have this widespread habit of thinking that in order for us to have categories like this, we have to agree on and determine in advance and universally what they mean. It seems like this assumption corrupts our ability to talk about these issues, as it puts one side in the role of universalizing for their experience, usually the default is cisgender position, but here is two trans women performing the basic rhetoric form, and the other on defensive as they have to argue against the generalizing and imposing categorization of the other. I'm sorry to call out my friend. I know I accidentally said a name. I'm just going to skip that. We're going to move on. The fact of the matter is that this post fundamentally misunderstands the point of this discussion. It just does. I understand this is through the lens of a lens of a lens. That is somebody explaining how they thought about the video and then another person thinking that's the video concretely. It's not. Sorry, it's not. That's not what the video is about at all. This idea that anyone's imposing or policing gender is not a thing. What is happening in this discussion is very simply this. Riley is asserting that we need to have a concrete argument of how we as trans people exist to be able to better advocate for ourselves, to better defend ourselves. DemonMama is pressing back on this notion of an objective form of gender because these types of conversations in the past have been bad faith and have used ways in which to create problems. The problem I have with my friend's brother's argument here is that it's missing the forest for the trees. It's talking about the fact that the discussion is around the idea of what a woman is, but it misses why that conversation's happening. This isn't about policing what a woman is, and it's certainly not about like forcing gender upon anyone. The argument here is very simple. What is a woman? The argument in this video is what is a woman? Because if you can't nail that down, then we have problems. Because when we just say trans women are women, that's not a sufficient enough argument to be able to really compel certain people or push for laws or things like that. We need to push, instead of the we are who we say we are, a better argument might be, well, if a woman is the entire sum total of certain experiences, beliefs, ways of being, certain clothing, and sort of culturally scripted choices, then someone who behaves in this way is probably a woman. Because if we take away the social construction of genitals, that is, the parts in and of themselves are not gendered in and of themselves, spoiler, this is the thing. I think it's really important to be aware of this and be understood that when we're talking about this stuff, we want to make sure that the people we are talking to, especially if they're cis and het, are watching the necessary stuff to understand the argument fully. Because when we sort of like push back on this stuff in a certain way, or report it in a way that isn't helpful, we create problems. These conversations affect me. They affect everybody who's trans. These are conversations we're constantly having. And this one, with Riley and DemonMama, should have never gone as far as it did. And I'm not trying to spread drama or keep that drama alive. I'm just trying to point out that when we see people being triggered, we need to do something about it. We need to step in. What should have happened is this conversation should have ended, and there should have been a clearer understanding of what this discussion is, because I can admit that it's very easy for someone to misunderstand it when, by all rights, the people explaining it are not doing a great job. The reason they're not doing a great job is because of fatigue and emotional reactivity. So, I'm going to leave it there for now. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Ring the bell if you'd like to be notified of things. You can also help out the channel by checking out our Patreon at /Patreon Trans Girl Therapist. You can also donate a tip to me on Streamlabs. Both those links will be down in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.